Welcome to the Supply Chain Dialogue Season 3, Episode 2. I'm Daniel Helmick. Remember the song of the 80s with the following lyrics? We got to install microwave ovens, custom kitchen deliveries, we got to move these refrigerators, we got to move these color TVs. Yep, dire straits, money for nothing, 1985. At that point in time, most of the white and electronic goods were still built in the same country and hauled around via trucks. Today, we expect these refrigerators, microwaves, and color TVs to come from offshore production facilities unless you live in certain parts of Asia where the production is clearly then local. China alone hosts 37% of the global manufacturing capacity, which is a brilliant success story for them. But it has its downsides when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. The most recent comprehensive data show that the transportation sector is responsible for 14 to 16% of global emissions. This number primarily includes emissions from cars, trucks, ships, trains, and aeroplanes involved in transportation and logistics of goods and people globally. The impact varies by region and the mode of transportation, with road transport generally being the largest contributor within the sector when you look at it overall. I will take a bit of time to peel the onion further so that the interview we will have will appear in an even brighter light. Bear with me and feel free to use the numbers as well in your discussions on both cost and emission reduction in your company. If you like to reread them, you will find all transcripts for Season 2 and 3 on the website of helmickadvisory.com, and they are linked to the respective podcast episode website at the bottom. So, 90% of world trade by volume is actually transported by sea, which includes the vast array of goods like raw materials, food, manufactured products, oil, and whole container ships, as well with orange juice that we so love for breakfast and in all our drinks. By the way, orange juice is less healthy than you think, with massive amounts of sugar, leading to obesity due to the constant craving that happens after the insulin spike caused by the juice. Rather eat an apple or orange or some berries instead, maybe even locally grown, which brings us back to our topic. Air cargo transport accounts for only 1 to 2% of total flights. Business travel, the people who fly across the world to manage global operations, account for another 12 to 15%. Isn't it amazing that 85% of air travel is actually private? Air travel is responsible for about 2 to 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions annually. However, the impact of air travel on climate change is much more complex than these numbers suggest, because airplanes emit other substances that can affect the climate, such as water vapor, soot, and nitrogen oxides, which have negative effects on high altitude that are different from greenhouse gas emissions at the surface. Let's look at other transportation modes as well. Broad estimates suggest that in developed countries, commercial vehicles, which includes all types of cargo and delivery vehicles, can account for about 10 to 15% of the total vehicle mileage. This percentage might be higher in regions heavily relying on road transport for moving goods due to the less developed rail or water transport infrastructure. Conversely, in regions with advanced multimodal transport systems, the reliance on road transport for cargo is lower. Similar geographic differences you find for rail. Currently the most eco-friendly way of moving goods, and ocean transport would be changed to new forms of propulsion, which actually exist, including, would you believe, hypermodern sailing technology. But that needs to be demanded by us, the customer, and the firms. So, staying with rail traffic has a significant cargo component. In many countries, freight transport is a critical part of the logistics chain. In the United States, for example, most rail traffic is freight, 70% plus, with freight trains primarily transporting commodities like coal, agricultural products, chemicals, and intermodal containers. In many European countries where passenger trains are more used, which is a good thing compared to air, especially for regional traffic, freight still contributes a significant portion of rail activity. Freight typically accounts to about 15 to 30% of total rail traffic in terms of tonnage and kilometers traveled in Europe. Globally, regions with expansive land areas and significant resources, such as Asia, Africa, China, and Canada, also see a high percentage of rail traffic being devoted to freight. given the economic efficiency of transportation goods over long distances. So I think by now it is clear that besides being expensive, transportation and logistics is normally about 8 to 12% of the total cost of goods sold of any manufacturing company. Transport has a significant impact on our greenhouse gas emissions in any company, both in and outgoing. So one might think it is imperative not to waste transportation capacity. So without further ado now, I'd like to introduce Adolf Kolako, CEO and founder of E2Log. They're a tech-driven logistics company that offers an end-to-end logistics orchestration platform designed to streamline what we talked about and optimize global supply chains for enterprises. Full disclosure, in one of my former corporate lives, I had transportation and logistics in my portfolio of departments. We ran large logistics operations with over 60,000 lanes in 120 countries, from switches that we shipped from one town to the next to 16-axle transport of transformers across the world, even into the Amazon jungle, where you needed small submarines evaluating the waterways before we were starting even with the shipping. When I heard about E2Log, which was after this part of my life, and saw their products, I accepted to sit on their board for 2 years out of pure past frustration that such a software so far did not exist. I wanted to help them to get the word out. In the meantime, they have grown significantly thanks to the many customers and freight forwarders that saw what I saw in them as well. Thank you for taking the time, Adolf.
Pleasure, Daniel. Thanks so much for having me over.
It's great to have you. It's good to see you again. It's been a while. Before we get into the deep there, tell me a little bit about yourself. What is your background? What inspired the creation of E2Log? And how has your vision eventually evolved since the company was founded?
Thank you, Daniel. I'll break that up into 3 parts: the personal, the professional, and then, of course, the E2Log part of the journey. So I was born and raised in Mumbai, in India, and I come from very humble beginnings. I've been active in sport from the time I was a little boy, and I've enjoyed playing field hockey, soccer, football, however you want to call it, as well as running. And that has stayed with me over the years and has been a big part of even my professional career, the whole piece around team building, teamwork, the ability to fight back and deal with setbacks or losses. So it helped formulate my DNA. As well as on the personal side, I'm married, blessed with a beautiful daughter, and she is going to be starting her career, in fact, in a few months' time. Interestingly, she is going to be in the oil and gas space too. She'll be joining Shell, so we're very excited for her. We're very happy as a family, and most interestingly, she's coming back to Houston, which is our home for the last 17 years now. On the professional side, my career has been all in supply chain, close to 30 years now. And I was actually very fortunate to be exposed to different dimensions of the supply chain over my career. And I started off actually with working for customs in India, which was a very interesting experience, working firstly at the airports and the seaports, touching and feeling cargo on a day-to-day basis. And we got to a point over the 12 years that I was there that you could walk past a container, and by the aroma that came out of it, you could tell the cargo that was inside. So that's part of the learning. Unknowingly, I got introduced to logistics and supply chain and started being exposed to the trade side of things, seeing the operations of how ports work, loading, unloading of ships. And it was a fascinating learning experience. But I decided to quit customs and then eventually build a career in supply chain. It was a transition. Candidly, it was a difficult transition coming out of working for a government organization, and took the plunge and went to a custom broker, literally on the other side of the fence, which is a very interesting change to make, especially in a challenging jurisdiction like India. But again, it was a very good learning experience, sometime with a custom broker, then on the freight forwarder side, and then eventually went on to join an ocean carrier. So I spent some time working for P&O Ned Lloyd. Again, a very different dimension of the supply chain.
Yep.
And P&O, at its time, as you would know, one of the major ocean carriers in the world, and being part of their logistics program and being able to learn from their systems. They had some great training programs. They gave me some great exposure, which I benefited from. And eventually I made the shift and came on to the shipper or the cargo owner side. And that's where my career started with Transocean, which used to be the world's largest offshore drilling company. And I also spent some time with Weatherford in the oil field services space. What those 16 years did for me was that it actually allowed me to get exposed to various facets of supply chain, well beyond the transportation and the logistics or the trade side of things. And credit to both of these companies because they exposed me to different kinds of roles, from sourcing to category management, contracting within supply chain, as well as the procurement side. So very different facets. And then I also had a good stint in inventory management. And that's such a powerful piece to understand if you are to realize what is the impact that transportation and logistics can make on the supply chain. And then I was fortunate enough to lead the logistics programs for these companies at a global level, as well as some of my customs experience came back into play because I was thrust into a trade compliance role and building a trade compliance program for Transocean in 2007 under some very challenging circumstances, and even ended up doing some roles within accounts payable, which was much further downstream segment of supply chain. So this was my sort of 25 plus years between regulator, service provider, shipper, and then eventually the to the latter part of your question, that's how the evolution took place, having spent these years there and learned so much. And I still say this candidly, there is more that I don't know than I know because the space is so humongous and so unique and so much to learn. But what these experiences did for me was very deep rooted. Through my times at Transocean and Weatherford, I traveled to almost every corner of the world which had oil. So the six continents, I traveled extensively. But travel is such a powerful medium of learning because I got an opportunity to meet and understand people and understand their cultures. I got a chance to see how each of these countries operate, right? Because supply chain logistics is so heavily dependent on what can be done within a particular geography, a particular location. I had an opportunity to visit the ports within these areas, meet local vendors, meet local service providers, and gained a very boots on ground perspective of supply chain. And that's really what started triggering the gears into motion as I was having these experiences. And a lot of this was from a lens of a very industrial kind of shipper because oil and gas, oil field services, very industrial, machine intensive kinds of businesses. And started realizing that whilst being part of these big companies, we had access to the different tools and applications and ERP systems and all of that. The reality is that they were not built or designed for these kinds of transportations. And what was the consequence? The consequence is we ran a lot of our business on email, spreadsheets, and phone calls. That was just the harsh reality of it. And that's where I saw the opportunity that this was an underserved space. And the idea was to solve the problems that I face when I was in these various roles. And the thought process was pretty straightforward. If I am facing this problem as a supply chain or a logistician, I'm pretty sure the others are facing it too. And there was a sort of underserved space where there was an opportunity to bring in technology, and that's how E2Log was conceptualized. And it's been quite a journey from where we started initially thinking of oversized cargoes to now where we've evolved into a very robust enterprise grade transportation management platform or project supply chain management platform.
No, quite a story out of. It gives you a completely different appreciation of what's going on, and then utilizing this knowledge, putting that into zeros and ones, is probably the only right approach that you can have. And from the software that I know that you guys have, you put all your knowledge in there and the knowledge of your colleagues as well into something which actually works. Let me ask you this. Now, with all the knowledge and experience that you have in the transportation and logistics industry, specifically in the area of industrials and project supply chains, can you give me an overview of the industry trends for industrial and project supply chains from your company's perspective?
So, one of the stark realizations that I went through, even though it was anticipated. I started this journey because I knew this was an underserved space. But it was quite shocking to see how much of a laggard this industry is from a standpoint of deploying technology and the right technology to run their supply chains. And it's common to see how many of these businesses actually run on what we call no tech, low tech, or early stage tech or point solutions, right?
Yep.
So it's estimated that greater than 90% of the global industrial corporations actually run their transportation and logistics in these two segments of what we call low tech, no tech, or point solutions. But what does this mean? This means that there is a tech stack which is within these large corporations, which do various facets of the business. So if you think of it from a supply chain perspective, typically you will have either an off-the-shelf ERP solution or a proprietary built material management system, managing the procurement, sourcing, maybe expediting, maybe category management. You would have the accounts payable side, which would be managed on these platforms. And then there are some really good technologies that they have when it comes to the engineering side of the business, the planning side of the business, because that's really their bread and butter. So that's really well taken care of. But when you start looking at the logistics and transportation piece, typically this is where it falls off the cliff and is completely disconnected because all of this is manual. But technology is touching everything that we do. And the use of smartphones, the use of tablets, the use of apps for every aspect of our lives, it's just made it routine to use these kinds of technologies to do what we do. Industrials and project logistics are no different. There is a perception, oh, this is different. The industrial and project supply chain is very different from, let's say, a FMCG or a retail or a pharma or a high-tech supply chain. Yes, that is absolutely true. And as folks who've spent a lot of time in supply chains, we understand the distinctions. But the reality is that there is nothing stopping the introduction of technology into this space, provided, of course, it is solving the right problems and it is delivering value. It's not about just bringing technologies in. So the trends that we are seeing is that these industries are on the cusp of a digital transformation. It's early stages. There are a lot of ideas floating around. There are newer technologies which are coming into play. And I do believe that AI could play a huge part in this. But at the same time, it is not going to be a leap from low tech, no tech, straight away to a very autonomous process. There is an evolution which these industries need to go through, and that process has started.
Interesting. I'm with you. And I think the change is going to happen just based on the generation change of people that are now working in logistics. Yeah. So you have all the digital natives that are now coming into the jobs. And I still remember 10, 15, 20 years ago, there was very little knowledge with regard to technology as well in transportation and logistics. On the other side, they as well did not get the budgets and the fundings for doing anything in this area. Now, for all the COOs and CEOs, if you would like to take a little bit of a step outside of your main offices, take a stroll down to the transportation and logistics areas where the shipping actually happen, and then just sit there. You will see the amount of opportunity that you have, both in the interest of your own cost, speed, but as well for the benefit of the customers. It's part of the whole journey, right? Every CEO probably was in the R&D area. Everyone naturally has to go into the finance area. Everyone goes into production. But when it comes to transportation logistics, it seems to be a blind spot. Now let's move on with our overview. Could you explain to our listeners now what Etolog specializes in and what sets your company apart from your competition?
So, firstly, we're a software company. It's a very important piece to understand and clarify at the outset. But we are very narrowly and strategically focused on industrial supply chains. What we have done is we've gone about primarily building two solutions off the same platform. One is what we call a transportation management platform, and the other is a project supply chain management platform. And the reason why we have done this is, as I was alluding to earlier, that these are underserved spaces. But what do? We actually help companies digitalize their transportation and logistics process and fill that void. There is a sort of a void between the sourcing, planning, and procurement piece relative to the actual execution and delivery piece. That's where there's a technological void. So that's the gap that we fill. But technologies like this have existed. So it's not that E2Log is doing something that nobody has done before in terms of building a transportation management platform. But what is different is that the technologies which are out there today, and you know this, you've been at very large global corporations leading them from a supply chain perspective, that tend to be general purpose solutions. And whether you're pharma, retail, FMCG, fashion, you end up using the same platform. And that works for some kinds of businesses. But industrials and projects are very different. Starting from the product itself, there's just so much
Absolutely.
variability within the same product itself. So almost like every shipment is unique. The complexities of execution, like the thing we were talking earlier about, sometimes you're executing a project in the Amazon jungle. That's what needs to be done. And when you think about execution under those circumstances, your general purpose solutions are not going to work. So what we at D2Log have done is that we actually founded the company with two fundamental skill sets. One is supply chain domain expertise, specifically from industrials and projects, and then a group of technologists who very strategically were brought from outside of supply chain. Why? Because we were not looking to replicate what somebody else has built, because then we would end up being that general purpose thing. We wanted to solve for a particular problem, and this is something that we're very proud of. We've never, ever looked at any other system to see what they do and how they do it. And that is not stemming from arrogance. That is stemming from the need and the drive to be innovative and creative with the solutioning. And that has been at the core of what we have done at E2Log. And so the end result ends up being that you're trying to solve a specific problem. But even in this journey, we've not come into this saying, oh, we got 20 years of experience in industrial supply chain, so we know it all, so now let's go build a solution. We have not done that either. We have started from a point of humility. We started from a point of saying, yes, there's a team of us here who spend a lot of time in this space. Let's go and build a foundation. And then let's take that foundation and go to some of the large global corporations and work alongside them to further develop this technology. So over the last 5 years, we've had our core supply chain team, we've had our tech team, we built a core foundational product. We've actually co-developed the product over the last 5 years alongside these major global corporations. And it's been a phenomenal learning experience. There's more things I don't know than I know. And the same applies to the rest of my team, because as we started working with, let's say, one of the companies we formed an alliance with was an engineering procurement construction company, one of the largest in the world. Another company that we co-developed the product was an oil major, but more the lubricants division. A third company that we co-developed the product with was an oilfield services company. We were developing it alongside them. There were so many ideas, and it was all stemming from, oh, I got this problem. This is how I handle it. I need technology to be an enabler to solve this for me, because it's going to make my life easier. It's going to impact the operations positively. It will benefit the end customer, the end user. So that process of co-developing and learning is what differentiates us. And what we did through the process is that we never custom built anything for anybody.
You have to explain that. How does that fit with what you mentioned beforehand?
What do we tend to do, or as supply chain executioners? We execute in silos. This is my company, this is my region, this is my team, this is how I do it. And a lot of this tends to be tribal knowledge. That's just the reality of it. A lot of people in supply chain and logistics, myself included, do not have a formal education in this business. It's not like accounting or finance or engineering, right? There is an engineering practice or a way of doing something which is universal. Supply chain is not like that. So we end up doing our own things. So in the process, what we did is we took the ideas, we understood the problems, we took the recommendations and the solution, but we built it not to solve the problem of one company, but to solve the problem of an industry as a whole. And the idea is to make that solution portable to any business within the industrial space. So those elements of how we have built what we built has been critical and has been a differentiator. But the other piece of it is the inspiration that we drew. We did not draw any inspiration from an ERP like system. And I'm not saying this with any disrespect. I'm just saying it from a perspective of how we approach building technology. And the motivation actually came from a personal incident, which happened when I was living with my family in the Middle East. My daughter was 14 at the time, and she came to me one evening and she said, Dad, I need to buy something on Amazon. So she said, Can I have your credit card? So I said, Sure. So I gave her the credit card. And Daniel, she came back 3 or 4 minutes later and she says, Thank you, Dad. I said, Hold on, hold on. What do you do with my credit card? So I bought what I needed. So I said, How did that happen so quick? She said, I looked for what I wanted and I picked it and I bought it. So I said, Have you used Amazon before? She said, No. So I said, Did you do some training or something on how to use Amazon? Is there some training module? And I was ignorant, okay, that I had never used it myself.
Sure.
And she said, No, Dad, it's super simple. So the inspiration came from that to say, how can we make a system which is so intuitive that you don't need a 500-page manual on how to use it? So that's the other big piece of what we've done and the differentiation how we build the technology. We've purposefully and strategically built it to be user friendly and intuitive, where you actually do not even need to be trained to be able to start using it.
Which is great. One of the big issues that we have with most of the software today, that if you are working in an SAP or an Oracle environment, bless you God, you will have a good time trying to figure out how that works. And hopefully there are a lot of people around you that are going to tell you that. At least you will have sticky notes everywhere around your computer to figure that out. No, now I have to fill that field out and what have you. No, excellent. What you did and how you designed it, and how you use smartly your customers to help you to come up with something that actually is meaningful for the whole industry, which is fantastic. Now, what can a customer expect if they would give you a carte blanche and they would say, look, E2log, help us to get our logistics under control? What is the size of benefits that they can achieve with you?
It starts with what is the mindset of the customer relative to change. You can look at change very skeptically, and you can look at change in a very embracing frame of mind. And that is directly proportionate to the returns that you get. But that being said, it's a journey. You can't expect every customer to jump in with both feet and say, "Oh, I'm going to, completely transform everything overnight." But to get to the benefits, we need to take a step back to see how logistics and transportation is split and what are the areas that a technology like E2log can make an impact, right? For example, our technology does not impact the physical movement of goods. That means ships are not going to sail faster or trucks are not going to move quicker because of E2log or technologies like ours. But definitely the planning and the execution piece can be done much better. And as you would know, depending on an industry type, depending on their supply chains, between 20 to 40% supply cycle time is consumed in planning and execution, including the inefficiencies that come with it. And that's a massive swath of time when you think about
Absolutely.
supply chain cycle time, right? Now, that's the area that we impact. Now, a lot of this 20 to 40% of consumption of supply cycle time comes from the lack of technology, the lack of the right tools, the lack of the right training, the lack of the right processes. So it's a combination of all of these factors which contribute to there is a component of time which is needed. It can't magically happen in a nanosecond. But this is where we can make an impact. And to be able to truly make an impact, you need to attack the end-to-end process. And this is what we recommend to our customers. If you want to see maximum impact, you need to go end-to-end. And what is end-to-end? End-to-end, from a standpoint of our sphere of influence, is not when the transportation process starts and not when the transportation process ends. There is a lot that happens way upstream, which will actually have a direct proportion to the quantum of impact. And if you think about how does the life of a logistician unfold historically, right? If I go back to my days when I was a logistician, I would have a situation where, say, a rig manager would come up to me and say, "Hey, Ado, we need this top drive to be picked up tomorrow, and it needs to be on a plane from Houston to Luanda." Oh, really? Top drive is ready to pick up tomorrow? That piece of equipment, which cost about $5 million, probably took 9 months to manufacture. Why didn't you tell me 9 months ago when you ordered that stuff? Because I could have planned, I could have scheduled, I could have booked,
Absolutely.
I could have done all kinds of stuff, right? So it is from that context where we encourage customers, take it end to end. The platform is designed to go way upstream, and do not think of transportation and logistics as the physical movement of cargo alone, but think of it from a perspective of order life cycle management. The life cycle of an order starts the moment the demand is created, a requisition is created by somebody says, "I need that top drive," which then eventually gets converted into a purchase order. It goes to, you identify a supplier, goes to a supplier, and then the supplier readies the material to move. So that's a big part of what we recommend to our customers to do. And then beyond that, you go through the logistics execution, transportation execution. There's a downstream implication too, because eventually invoices need to be paid. You have to take care of your logistics providers from a perspective of managing their payments, all of that. So from a standpoint of a situation where a customer gives us a carte blanche, we say digitalize the end-to-end process. However, we do it in a phased manner. Sometimes there are companies who operate across different parts of the world. Pick up a small part of the world first and take that, digitalize that process. There will be lessons learned. No question about it. Every company is unique. Demands are unique. Challenges will crop up. But do that, do it well, master it, take the lessons from there, and then you start scaling. And that's where the maximum impact comes, because then the sphere of influence of a digital transformation goes well beyond just the transportation piece, because now you start impacting order management, now you start impacting planning, now you start impacting scheduling, now you start impacting inventory decisions, inventory stocking levels, cash flow, working capital influence. There's so many other areas of impact now as a consequence thereof. But going back to the crux of this stems from what is the appetite, what is the mindset of the customer.
And as in one of my favorite books from Stephen Covey, one of the habits is start with the end in mind. And sure, you have to run prototypings and you have to test things out, and all of this is good. But if you know from the beginning, okay, I would like to really revolutionize or transform my supply chain or the way that I handle my transportation and logistics, you're going to win. That's the reason why I asked the question carte blanche. Just tipping your toe into the water and just realizing once again that the water is wet, that we normally see in these kind of situations, that's not where you make a difference. Yeah, you need to have a partner like E2log, for example, that you actually say, look, let's make a difference.
So, Daniel, if I may, there's
Sure.
one point of recommendation that I'd like to make to CEOs or leaders listening into this podcast, and that is, do not treat supply chain like the mailroom guys. This is a story which is a reality. When I joined a company, a large global corporation, the transport group, as they call them, was seated in the mailroom. And it, no disrespect to the folks in the mailroom, but the point here is that was the view that the leadership team had of the importance of transportation and logistics as a function within the company. And the first thing I did, I said, I want my team out of there. That's not where they need to be. They need to be sitting alongside operations. They need to be understanding firsthand what the needs are, what's happening in the business, and they need to be collaborating with, and the operations and the projects and the field managers need to have these guys next to them. So the profile of supply chain, the profile of transportation and logistics needs to be improved. They should not be looked at as a function which is told jump and then they ask how high. It is a strategic function within an organization which can make a direct impact on the bottom line if used correctly.
Absolutely. And I just take my numbers from my different industries. Transportation and logistics is between 8 to 12% of the total spend of your company. Most of the companies will not even know their transportation and logistics spend. So therefore, I give you the number. And if you do an excellent job in terms of transformation, utilizing software, you can have an opportunity of 20 to 30% reduction. I've seen it, I've done it together with my teams. I had some excellent transportation and logistics folks that were working with us that we hired. And as well, we introduced new software. Unfortunately, at that point in time, there was no E2log, so we had to take other software. So, and if you then calculate the amount of money, just take 8 to 12% from your total spend as such, you assume 30% reduction, then that is what Adolf talked about, hits the bottom line. This is cost of goods sold that are no longer on your balance sheet and that you can utilize for R&D, for mergers and acquisitions and what have you. So there's a lot of money lying there that you can utilize. The larger the company it is, the more money lies there. So you mentioned beforehand already AI and that it can help. Can you tell us how E2log leverages technology like generative AI or other AI or blockchain to enhance logistics operations, if at all?
Short answer is we absolutely do, but the problem has to be tackled in incremental steps. So one of the first steps is to actually digitalize the process, number one. Number two is to bring the end-to-end process onto a single platform. And once you bring the process onto a single platform, you bring all the users onto the platform. So you're setting the foundational blocks to actually then bring AI in. So this is the piece that has to be done first. And the way we've approached it is to get these foundational blocks in place. And it takes time. It takes time to be able to build all of that so that you bring it all together. But now that it's all coming together, that's where it gets very exciting because there are two parts to this when we think about it from an AI perspective. One is being able to use AI to do things in a particular way for a customer based on their data, their business rules, and minimize the human intervention in those transactions. But what is really exciting is the Gen AI piece because as I alluded to earlier, when you look at how supply chains execute, companies execute in isolation. This is my company, this is what I do, this is how I've always done it. I've been doing this for the last 10 years. But when you start seeing business being executed on a common platform across businesses, across industries, within various segments, you start seeing patterns of how things are being executed. And then there is a huge opportunity to bring in Gen AI into that and drive logistics a very different way than it has been executed, which is a very siloed thing today. So we have already built AI capabilities into our platform. It's evolving not because of the limitations with what tech can do, and there's a lot more which will be developed in the years to come. But I think the limitations are first in just helping the industrial and project supply chain business to transition from this very manual way of doing things to bring it onto a platform. That's the heavy lift. And once that heavy lift is happening, it's a continuous process, it's going to take some time. Then the AI piece starts kicking in. And we've applied it for how do you identify consolidation opportunities? How do you make sure that you're looking at the best ports to move something into? How are you looking for any exceptions in the cargo? Something is oversized, something is going to trip up a height or a weight, which is going to significantly increase your costs because of how you're choosing to move something. So we're using
Yeah.
AI for a lot of those kinds of things. But the exciting thing is what lies ahead, Daniel, with Gen AI. And
Yeah.
we think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Thank you, Adolf. Let me just come back to one point, just to make sure that I understand it correctly. Now, let's assume I have a company that is running on SAP, and as well, logistics is linked in SAP. You're not saying that you completely change that to E2log, do you? Can you explain that?
That's a very good point. Thanks for bringing it up. So the short answer is no. You don't need to replace existing systems which do non-transportation work. So if you have an ERP for procurement, great, you use that. You have an ERP for accounts payable, you use that. In fact, today we put out a post on technology doesn't fix everything. And part of the message that we were giving is that a very important piece that companies need to think about is which are the peripheral systems that need to be integrated with a platform like E2log to be able to utilize the end-to-end process. So what would happen in this case would be that if the purchase orders or sales orders are being generated in an ERP system, those would be digitally twinned into the platform like E2log. So that information is now available for the transportation process. And similarly, downstream, let's say when invoices are coming in, if invoices need to be paid, the processing, the digital audit of invoices, etc., will happen in E2log. But eventually, that data will be pushed via APIs, as an example, to the accounts payable system, which would be the ER for payment, and that confirmation of payment would come back. So, strategically, where platforms play a fascinatingly role is the fact that they coexist with systems which are currently
Yeah.
there, and strategically they ingest data that is necessary for the transportation and logistics process, and similarly push out the most pertinent data to those systems where that information is most needed. For example, if there is an engineering platform or system that a company is using, don't expect the engineer to go into some other system and go track an order and go find some shipment. The pertinent information about when that shipment is expected to arrive or when that order is expected to arrive should be visible to the engineer in that system that he or she is working on a day-to-day basis. So that's where platforms become very powerful. Pull in the right data from the right sources and push out the right data to the right systems where it's needed. And in the event those things don't exist, then it becomes a common place where it can be found.
Sure. No, that makes perfect sense, Adolf. For those that are more interested in this as well, we did a podcast and as well a blog with regard to what we call digital twin for supply chain or for value chains, actually, where we say, okay, overall, you would like to create something, as Adolf as well mentioned, which is to some extent twinning data onto a platform, as he calls it. We call it just digital twin, where you can see and have access to all the data in the same kind of data hub in a cloud environment. Today, digital twin technology is mainly focusing on manufacturing locations, and then you have one manufacturing location where there is a digital twin set up, then the next one doesn't have it. But which, if you do it right, you would look for the whole value chain, because at that point in time, you just shine a bright light from the customer to the sub suppliers, tier two, and then everyone can see everyone else, and with that optimizes then their respective portion of the journey. I'm looking really forward, like you. I'm looking forward what is going to come in the near future. I think this is going to be revolutionary. Let's take it a little bit further. Can you describe the key features and capabilities of your software? And please discuss as well how easy it is for new clients to integrate E2log solutions into their already existing systems.
Sure. So there are primarily four modules to the application with the intent of managing the end-to-end process on a single platform. So it starts upstream at the planning phase. This is where the digital twinning happens from the order management systems that it comes in. And from there, we then have the ability for expediting to be done. So as orders are placed, a lot of the businesses in the industrial space tend to have long lead items. So where teams from within the company are following up with suppliers and the ability to put revised promise dates and things like that. And then eventually items are marked as ready to ship. That's where the procurement of logistics services now starts. There is the ability to upload rate contracts, get spot pricing, conduct reverse auctions, build solutions, look at various alternative ways of moving cargo, work within your preferred group of due diligence approved logistics providers, and then eventually award the shipments. And once that is done, we get into what we call the execution module. This is where the tracking, the tracing, the document exchange, the communication, all of this happens within the platform as against the traditional emails, phone calls, and ways of doing things. And within this, there are some very powerful integrations, because when you think about cargo which is moving, today we integrate with external sources so that you can track any ship which is on the oceans anywhere in the world. We have integrations which allow you to track any container anywhere in the world. And similarly, we also have a mobile app which allows at a truck level to be able to locate a truck as it's moving through. And then eventually the last module is what we call the pay module, where if there are deviations in cost, detention, demurrage, change in mode of transportation, and new services which are needed, all of that is built into that, including the digital audit of freight invoices. And as you know very well, this is such a labor intensive process in
Absolutely.
supply chains, non value adding, and just low tech. So that is
Yeah.
fully digitally audited, pushed for payment. But then the most fascinating part is the analytics that comes with this. So as the shipments are going through their life cycle, orders are going through their life cycle, there are hundreds and hundreds of data points which are picked along the way and roll up into our analytics platform. And there's just a wealth of reporting and analytics, right from what's on time, what's delayed, how a supplier is performing, to the spend on logistics, cost versus budget, performance of logistics providers, a lot of that. And even with the invoicing, how many invoices are being paid on time, what's delayed, and things like that. But also, there is the carbon footprint capture that happens as a consequence of the entire process being managed on the platform. It's a very powerful piece and is tackling the logistics and transportation piece of scope 3.
Excellent. And this is the next question that I'm going to ask you. So thank you very much for bringing it up. As we all know, transport and logistics is one of the big contributors to greenhouse gas emissions in the world. We cannot get everything from Amazon, from everyone else, and ship everything through. And then on the other side, be astonished that this as well has impact. But tell me what your software is doing to help companies reduce greenhouse gas emissions in logistics, which then has a direct impact on getting to net zero in scope 3.
So there are various areas of impact, and it goes well beyond the first commencement of the movement of the cargo itself. And so there are certain features and capabilities which are built into the technology to actually help companies eventually reduce their greenhouse gases. And it starts from being able to optimize the loads. When you're loading cargo to move, right, starts at that stage. So we have the concept of a load builder, wherein it shows you how you can stack cargo into a container, as an example, or into a truck to maximize the capacity. And it's 3D. It's a very slick technology which helps you work towards that. In addition to that, we have what we call the solution builder. So as logisticians are making decisions on what logistics process to follow, or which route to pick, or which provider to pick, the ability for them to have AI generated solutions to say, hey, these are the three solutions you have, these are the routes you could take, you could reduce the transit time as a consequence thereof, and be able to actually then work out the best solutions for them, which eventually help with the carbon footprint capture. But the other piece also is the ability to pick the right mode of transportation based on the degree of priority or urgency for an item. And not every item which is ordered is required on the other side of the world immediately. There are situations where a project site or a commissioning location may not need something for the next 6 months, right? So when you think about the fact that we go way upstream to the order side of it, so when an order is received, not only do we bring the order information in, but we also help capture the required at site date, which is very impactful. And then we surface that to the logistician when he or she is making a decision on a logistics service or a mode of transportation. And very often we find that in some industries, there's a tendency, no, no, air freight it is urgent, let's move it. And logisticians can now actually make a conscious decision to downgrade the mode of transportation with the ability to reduce the carbon footprint as a consequence thereof. And then the other piece is shipment consolidation. Again, very powerful capability, AI driven, the ability to say, hey, you know what? in these large organizations, candidly, what is happening sometimes, people are sitting in two offices apart and they're doing their own thing, not aware of the fact that there is more cargo moving from the same origin to the same destination for the same company, for the same plant, the same location. So the ability using AI to identify all of those consolidation opportunities for a particular trade lane, for a particular mode of transport, for a particular operation, and present those with the intent of then reducing the number of shipments required also helps from a carbon footprint capture. And then the last piece is which is the tough part, right? Actually capturing your carbon footprint. What you cannot measure, you cannot improve. It's very simple. And because of the complexity with door-to-door movement of cargo, as cargo is changing hands, multiple logistics providers in the same shipment, good luck being able to capture that carbon footprint in the absence of a single platform where everyone is executing on. So those elements, and there are some very basic rudimentary things which are also important. It's like the paperwork. A lot of the paperwork which people have to shift through papers to manage their logistics, a lot of it just vanishes. It's not needed anymore in a digital solution like this. So various areas of impact.
And when you mentioned the opportunity to fill the container correctly, for those of you who do not have a visual for that, just think Tetris, three-dimensional Tetris. And if you would like to see how your transportation normally works, just go once again to your shipping area and look at the 40-foot containers that are just filled up to 50 centimeters high. And then the door closes and the container moves on. And the next container comes in. The door opens and you fill it once again with mainly air. This is where the opportunity lies with regard to both cost, but as well greenhouse gas emissions, as Adolf pointed out. It's amazing if you see the reality. In your head, it always looks good, but in the reality, we have so much opportunity in this space. It's unbelievable. Now, let's talk about the opportunities that you were able to get for your clients so far. Can you give us a couple of case studies where A2Log has helped clients achieve their business and sustainability goals?
Of course. In fact, a very good example is a $26 billion conglomerate that we're doing business with in Asia. Their case, Daniel, was they have 14 companies within the group, very diverse portfolio from defense to heavy engineering to manufacturing to hydrocarbons, renewables, water resources. And each of these 14 companies have been executing their logistics and transportation in isolation for the longest time. The company spends approximately $500 million a year on logistics. And so E2Log was brought in to actually have a single platform for the execution of their logistics end to end across the enterprise, across these 14 companies. And we've had a successful deployment with the company there. Today, we have more than 2,000 users who are on the platform across these 14 companies, which includes 400 logistics providers who are executing a combination of domestic, regional, and international logistics. And this is being used across 30 countries, and about 60,000 shipments a year are now being digitalized end to end. So the company, from a sustainability standpoint, is running a far more efficient logistics operation than they were. And some of the areas of impact that I alluded to earlier kick in here in this kind of a deployment. And we have to give credit to this customer because they had a vision, a very clear vision, that they wanted to digitalize the end-to-end process across 14 companies. And that's a very brave decision to make.
Yes.
In a space where technology is evolving, there's no history of, we can look at the last 10 years, how companies have used this particular platform and have successfully digitalized. So that's one significantly successful example. And there's a very interesting another use case which we've solved for. So this is a $6.5 billion decarbonization project here in North America, where the company had a very high focus, obviously decarbonize the priority, and they were looking for a platform to run the end-to-end project supply chain management. And E2Log has been deployed for that. It's a combination of the project owner and 3 subcontracted EPCs who are all executing on the E2Log platform to support the execution of this project. So again, just monumental impact in all the spheres that we've been able to make a significant difference. So very diverse use cases, as you can see. One is more deployed as a transportation management form for very industrial company, and the other is a project supply chain management platform for a mega project.
Excellent. So thank you very much, Adolf, for spending the time today. We put the links into the show notes, how people can reach your company, and as well links to your website. My recommendation to everyone who was able to listen to that discussion, try them out. Give them an opportunity to come to your door and talk about the solution that they have. You will be amazed. As I always said to Adolf when I was as well sitting in their board, I would have loved to have their solution at the time that I was in some of the large companies beforehand. So, Adolf, thank you very much. It was a pleasure. All the best to you.
Thank you, Daniel. This was wonderful. Enjoyed chatting with you and grateful for the opportunity.
So transportation and logistics is a beautiful white swan, not the ugly duckling as many CEOs and operation heads think. It impacts massively customer satisfaction, greenhouse gas emission, and your balance sheet if you take the duckling and nurture it with your company's focus. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Supply Chain Dialogues. If you did, please subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Google, or any other major podcast platform. And if you are a subscriber, tell a friend or colleague or any decision maker in your company. We gained significant traction this year because of many of you doing this. So thank you very much. If you would like to reach out to the team of E2Log, check out their website linked to the show notes. It's e2log.com, where 2 is the number, or directly go into their website under Contact to get an expert engaged with you. With that, stay safe, be bold, and see you in 2 weeks. These are the Supply Chain Dialogues produced and copyrighted by Helmick Advisory AG in 2024.